On the morning of October 16, 1793, the heavy iron door of her cell creaked open inside La Conciergerie prison. The guards froze. Marie Antoinette's hair, once a symbol of royal vanity, had turned completely white overnight. But this was not from fear. It was the result of medical torture, deliberate starvation, and untreated hemorrhaging that had drained her body, cell by cell, of every trace of life. And that wasn't even the worst part. What you're about to hear will shatter everything you thought you knew about the mercy of the guillotine. Because here's the truth your history teachers never told you. Marie Antoinette's execution was engineered to be as brutal, as humiliating, and as prolonged as humanly possible. And the evidence is undeniable. In this episode, you'll discover 3 horrifying facts historians have buried for over 230 years. First, her execution was deliberately drawn out for maximum public degradation, every detail calculated torment. Second, the executioner botched the job, and there's proof it was intentional. Third, what they did to her body afterward will make you physically sick. If you want the dark truths history tried to hide, subscribe now, because by the end of this, you'll wish you hadn't. Let's begin where it all started. Marie Antoinette wasn't born a villain. In 1770, a 14-year-old Austrian princess was sent to France to secure a political alliance through marriage. A child playing dress-up in the most opulent palace in Europe. 23 years later, that child would become the most hated woman in France, blamed for economic collapse, military defeats, and moral decay she didn't cause. But here's the truth, her death wasn't justice. It was ritualized revenge, setting the blueprint for modern political terror. The French Revolution invented a new kind of execution, one not merely to kill, but to erase a person's humanity before the blade ever fell. You've heard the myth. The guillotine was swift, humane, scientific. That's exactly what they wanted you to believe. Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotine promised instant, painless death, a lie that would echo for centuries, and Marie Antoinette's final moments proved it. Because when the Revolutionary Tribunal decided she must die, they didn't just want her dead, they wanted her destroyed. They wanted Europe's monarchies to see the message clearly. This is what happens when you defy the revolution. Her destruction began 76 days before her death. And those 76 days were more horrific than the execution itself. August 2nd, 1793. 2 a.m., Revolutionary Guards stormed into the prison cell where she'd been held with her children. They dragged her to the Conciergerie, a medieval dungeon beneath the Paris courthouse, known as the antechamber to death. There, they stripped her of everything, her gowns, her jewels, her wig, and her last shred of dignity. Her new cell measured 11 feet by 9 feet, no windows, a straw mattress alive with lice, a single bucket for waste, and the cruelest detail? They stationed 2 male guards inside her cell, day and night, for 76 days straight. Imagine that. You are the former Queen of France. You cannot bathe, sleep, dress, or relieve yourself without men watching. Surviving guard reports from the Revolutionary Archives, suppressed until 1858, describe her being forced to undress before them, enduring crude jokes about her body. This was not random cruelty. It was psychological warfare, designed to crush her resistance, to make her appear frail, delirious, and guilty when paraded before the tribunal. They controlled every crumb of her food, enough to live, not enough to think clearly. They woke her with random inspections, shook her awake with lanterns in her face. They brought her children's clothing into the cell, forcing her to smell them, reminding her she'd never see them again. She scratched a small calendar into the stone wall with her fingernails. Archaeologists rediscovered it in 1989. 76 tiny marks, a countdown to oblivion. By day 50, her body was collapsing. Hemorrhaging from untreated internal bleeding, she lived in constant pain. Her skin turned waxen. Her hair, once powdered gold, became pure white from shock and malnutrition. When doctors begged to treat her, the prosecutor sneered, "Let her bleed." It will make her easier to judge. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was systematic deconstruction, a ritual designed to strip a queen of her humanity before the blade fell. But the real torture hadn't even begun. Because on October 14th, 1793, just 2 days before her death, she was dragged to trial. What happened in that courtroom remains one of the most grotesque miscarriages of justice in human history. The trial began at 8 a.m. and lasted 16 hours straight. No lawyer for the first 12 hours. No witnesses for her defense. No time to prepare. The verdict? Already written. We know this because when prosecutor Antoine Fouquier-Tinville was executed the following year, officials found the draft verdict in his papers, dated October 12th, 2 days before the trial even began, and then came the vilest act of all. Tinville needed a charge so monstrous that even sympathizers would turn against her. So he dragged her 8-year-old son, Louis Charles, into court, a terrified child who had been beaten and starved until he signed a confession accusing his mother of incest. When that accusation was read aloud, the crowd, usually bloodthirsty, fell silent. One witness wrote, "The charge was so obscene that even the tricoteuses stopped knitting." Marie Antoinette rose to her feet. For 16 hours, she sat in silence, dignified, composed, barely reacting to the torrent of accusations, treason, conspiracy, moral corruption. But then came the one charge that shattered her composure. She turned toward the crowd, her voice trembling but steady enough to pierce the silence. "If I have not replied, it is because nature itself refuses to answer so vile a charge laid against a mother. I appeal to all mothers here. Can such a crime even be possible?" For the first time in weeks, the courtroom cracked. Women wept openly. Even hardened revolutionaries shifted uncomfortably. In that single moment, Marie Antoinette reminded them she was human, not a queen, not a symbol. A mother, and the prosecutor, Fouquier-Tinville, saw the danger instantly. A flicker of sympathy could undo everything, so he halted the trial, declared a recess. And when the court reconvened, it was midnight. The sympathetic crowd was gone. In their place sat hand-picked jurors, men plucked from taverns and revolutionary clubs, drunk on cheap wine and ideology. By 4 a.m., after 20 hours of orchestrated brutality, the predetermined verdict was delivered, guilty of treason. Sentence, death by guillotine. The execution was scheduled for noon that same day, 8 hours to live. But here's what your textbooks won't tell you. When she heard her fate, Marie Antoinette made one small request, a single act of dignity that enraged her captors. She asked to die in a closed carriage. That request sealed her humiliation. The Revolutionary Committee sneered, "She wants dignity. We'll show her how much she deserves." They ordered her to be transported in an open dung cart, the same wooden wagon used to haul manure through the streets of Paris. The symbolism was clear. The former Queen of France, now treated as refuse. At 11:00 a.m., executioner Charles-Henri Sanson entered her cell with scissors. Not to prepare her gently, but to hack off her hair before laughing guards, a final act of degradation. Her white, brittle hair fell in clumps onto the filthy stone floor. Then they tied her hands behind her back so tightly that the rope bit into her wrists, forcing her into a position that made balance impossible. Every jolt of the cart sent her body lurching forward, slamming against the rough wood. Normally, the trip from La Conciergerie to Place de la Révolution took 15 minutes. For Marie Antoinette, they stretched it to 1 hour and 12 minutes. They chose the longest, most crowded route through Paris, past the Rue Saint-Honoré, where thousands packed the streets, past the Tuileries Palace, where she had once lived as queen. At every intersection, the driver was ordered to stop so the mob could stare. They wanted Paris to watch every second of her degradation. The artist Jacques-Louis David, revolutionary hero and court painter turned propagandist, sat at a cafe window sketching her as she passed. That drawing survives, her face gaunt, mouth a thin, resigned line, eyes hollow. This wasn't defiance. It wasn't fear. It was emptiness. the look of someone already dead inside, waiting for her body to follow. 30,000 people lined the route. They screamed insults. They hurled rotten food and animal waste. They sang songs, mocking her as Madame Deficit. Street performers dressed in tattered gowns pretended to beg for mercy, and the crowd roared with laughter. One observer, Madame de Staël, wrote in her journal, "I watched from my window and understood for the first time that humans are capable of finding joy in cruelty." They weren't watching justice. They were watching a performance, a ritual of collective vengeance. At 12:15 p.m., the cart reached the Place de la Révolution, now the Place de la Concorde. The guillotine loomed 20 feet high, painted bright red, glinting under a grey October sky. 50,000 spectators packed the square. Marie Antoinette descended from the cart, her legs trembling after 76 days of confinement. She stumbled, stepping on the executioner's foot. Even then, conditioned by a lifetime of courtly grace, she looked up and whispered, "Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." Those were her final words. But what happened next, the moment the blade fell, was not what history tells you. Because decades later, the truth came out. In 1847, Charles-Henri Sanson's grandson published the family's private memoirs, and in them was a confession that rewrote the myth of the guillotine's mercy. The blade that killed Marie Antoinette had been intentionally dulled. The Revolutionary Committee had ordered it. Why? A dull blade meant more suffering, more blood, more spectacle, more theater for the mob. Multiple witnesses recorded hearing more than one impact. The blade did not slice cleanly through her neck. It struck once, then again, perhaps even a third time. One eyewitness, the journalist Gracchus Babeuf, wrote in his diary, "I saw the blade rise and fall twice." The crowd cheered louder the second time. Imagine that. Your head locked in the lunette, the wooden frame cold against your throat. You hear the mechanism click. The blade releases, but the pain doesn't end. You feel impact but not completion, and for 1, 2 agonizing seconds, an eternity stretched thin, she remained conscious, still aware, feeling the crushing pressure but not yet gone. Then the blade rose again, and fell a second time. That wasn't mercy. That wasn't progress. That was torture, rebranded as enlightenment. When it was finally over, executioner Charles-Henri Sanson reached into the basket and lifted Marie Antoinette's severed head by the hair. Protocol demanded that he display it to all four sides of the crowd, but then a grotesque accident. Her white, blood-matted hair slipped through his soaked gloves, and the head tumbled back into the basket with a sickening thud, so loud witnesses heard it over the mob's roar. And what did the crowd do? They didn't gasp. They cheered louder. Muskets fired into the air in celebration. Street vendors sold prints of the execution before her body was even cold. This wasn't justice. It was a carnival of vengeance. And the cruelty didn't end with her death. Marie Antoinette, once the most powerful woman in Europe, was dumped into an unmarked pit at the Madeleine Cemetery. Her remains were thrown in with 8 other corpses, doused in quicklime to dissolve faster, and buried without ceremony, without even a marker. No cross, no stone, no trace she had ever existed. The revolution wanted her erased, body and memory alike, a warning to anyone who might defy the will of the people. And the tragedy. It worked. Her death on October 16th, 1793, didn't end tyranny. It birthed a new one. In the 10 months that followed, 16,594 men and women met the same fate beneath the guillotine. Not foreign enemies, but French citizens, condemned in sham trials with verdicts written before proceedings even began. The guillotine, once sold as the humane alternative, became the symbol of industrialized political murder. Marie Antoinette's death set the template: public humiliation, spectacle as justice, torture disguised as law. Humanity stripped away before the body was. Her execution proved a terrifying truth. When revenge replaces justice, no one is safe. Today it's the Queen. Tomorrow, the merchant who overcharges for bread. Next week, your neighbor who says the wrong thing. And soon enough, it's you. Marie Antoinette's death wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about fear, a collective ritual meant to destroy a symbol. They didn't just want her executed. They wanted her suffering to be entertaining, her shame to be total, her memory to be reduced to mockery. And for more than 2 centuries, they nearly succeeded. We remember her as a punchline, the frivolous queen who supposedly sneered, "Let them eat cake." But that quote, a lie invented half a century after her death by propagandists who needed a villain. The real Marie Antoinette was flawed, yes, naive perhaps, but she didn't deserve to have her dignity peeled away piece by piece, then beheaded before a jeering mob under a blade, made dull on purpose. This is what happens when ideology devours empathy, when righteousness turns into ritualized cruelty. We've seen it replayed again and again, in the Bolshevik purges, in the Khmer Rouge, in every revolution where the oppressed become oppressors. The tools evolve. The psychology doesn't. Dehumanize, humiliate, erase. So now I'll ask you, and think carefully before you answer, was Marie Antoinette truly a villain who deserved death, or a scapegoat for France's failures? And more importantly, where does justice end and revenge begin? Drop your thoughts in the comments, but be ready to defend them, because anyone who thinks this is a simple question hasn't been paying attention. If this story disturbed you, good. It means you still have empathy left. Subscribe, because next week we expose the poetic justice that destroyed Robespierre, the man who built the very machine that devoured him. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. And remember, history isn't meant to comfort you. It's meant to wake you up.